spinning.
Wow, that was an exciting intro. Good morning or good afternoon, where you are. Welcome to today's live discussion on Agentic AI in manufacturing. My name is Chris Gaynor. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer here at Magentic, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. I'm joined by three excellent panelists today, which I will get each of them to introduce themselves. Jeff, can we start with you?
Sure. My name is Jeff Winter. I'm Vice President of Commercial Strategy with Belden, and I'm excited to be here.
Thanks, Jeff. Kevin.
Hi, my name is Kevin Bowers. I'm the Vice President of Research at AMT, the Association for Manufacturing Technology. Equally excited to be here.
Everyone's very excited. Lastly, but not leastly, I think that's the way you say it. Ian, over to you.
I also am excited to be here. Ian Barkin, co-founder, CEO of Magentic, and thrilled to have two amazing guests to have this discussion with you, Chris. This is going to be great.
Perfect. I'm also excited. Let's get going. So this session is designed to be as practical and pragmatic as possible, not a grand tour of buzzwords. We'll cover a couple of topics, theories, concepts, but the goal here is to have real conversations about what is happening in the world of manufacturing. Before we get going, Ian, perhaps a quick plug for Magentic, if you wouldn't mind?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, bear with us. Ultimately, Magentic is co-founded by and a team built up of folks who've been in this wave of automation for nearly 20 years. We love what we do. We've helped enterprises around the world to make sense of whatever the newest flavor of automation is, distill, cut through the noise and figure out where this matters, how to do it, and then to do it for them. Magentic is the name is a play on multi-agentic, just because that's what you need these days. And we mean human agents and AI agents working together. That hybrid, that collaborative workforce is going to be the winning one. We firmly believe from our experience. So that's us. Next slide, Chris. Ultimately, our approach reflects that, not just our experiences of, and I'll touch on this, I think, during the talk, which is a lot of folks are very excited about what the art of the possible is, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done. The ground truth, the reality in most operations is, in many cases, they're not ready for this, and they need to do in some cases, boring and traditional work to get ready. And that's something we embrace in what we call a living lab. So enough about that. Enough from me. Chris, take the mic back. Get this back on track.
Perfect. Just to give us some context before we get into the interrogation here today, Kevin and the team at AMT have kindly shared some amazing research they've done into the adoption, deployment, and general sentiment of AI across manufacturing. I'm going to share a couple of these data points just to give us some context for the discussion, so it won't be death by PowerPoint here. But importantly, in this first slide, we're seeing the top desired outcome from AI in the context of manufacturing. When we say in manufacturing, we're talking production floor to management office. Decision making, right? Cited by 63% of respondents. Then it comes to anything to do with cash coming into the business, sales, and growth, customer experience in third, and then operating cost in there at fourth. Really important here, these are the areas Agentic we see through our work are not just aspirations, these are actualized benefits we're seeing with customers as well. But importantly, that's what we desire. The second point is, where do we believe, or where does the manufacturing organization believe value can show up? And so interestingly, while engineering, sales, and marketing are the highest expected areas, what we see through our work is actually operations, sales, marketing, finance, and accounting are also just as important in delivering value. Why? Non-core, highly administrative, heavily manual way the work is getting done. And so, yes, there is a significant amount of work that can be done on the production side, but in the back office, customer layer, handoffs between management office to production floor, this is where AI is really unlocking value for organizations. And so then the question becomes, so where do we see this? Where are these patterns showing up? Traditional manufacturing applications, predictive maintenance, production optimization are obviously the key aspects here. But there's also meaningful interest in document processing, customer service automation, sales forecasting, finance and accounting, specifically FP&A and reporting. These things tell us that, yes, whilst there are more interesting ways that AI can be deployed into the organization through the traditional production routes, that's not always where the value is. And so as we go through this discussion, we'll talk more about the use cases, but it's interesting to see both sides of the coin. Finally, then, is some of the concerns. So this will be the bridge into the discussion, but when organizations are assessing where and how to deploy AI, 30% have said we need to buy the capabilities in. So to de-risk the organization from AI spend or overspend, or simply deploying AI in the wrong place. Buying in the services is where most people are looking. Hybrid, I'll do a bit ourselves, bring in a partner. Very few, minimal, in the minority are people saying they're going to build it all themselves. And so again, this is important to understand that when we talk about build and buy later on, this is where a lot of folk are thinking. This is where a lot of folk in the space's heads are at. And so with that, as I said, this is not meant to be a presentation, so I will stop the presentation there, and we'll crack on with the discussion. And so AI is everywhere. AI means everything, and it means nothing all at the same time. So how do we define AI in the context of manufacturing? Jeff, do you want to give us some thoughts there?
Sure. And I actually really like this topic because AI does mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. And before we look at anything from robots to neural networks, we have to start with why AI is so notoriously difficult to define. And from my viewpoint, I believe it began back with Alan Turing in the 1950. He kind of famously avoided a direct definition entirely. He proposed instead his imitation game. And Turing's point was that we shouldn't get bogged down in the internal mechanisms of how the machine works, because if it can behave so much like a human that we can't tell the difference, it has basically reached a level of intelligence. Now, several years later, John McCarthy, who actually coined the term artificial intelligence, kind of gave us more of a mechanical definition, the science and engineering of making intelligent machines. But how do either of those really help us? The problem here is that both of these definitions lead us to what's called the AI effect, or also known as Tesla's theorem, which basically states that AI is whatever hasn't been done yet. So once we figure out how to make AI repeatable, we no longer call it AI. It becomes a disappearing act. And so that makes it very difficult to define what AI is, because we're always constantly chasing something new. We haven't agreed on what constitutes the technology. We haven't agreed on what actually constitutes intelligence. And so a lot of times things that were, we called AI 10 years ago, now we just consider features in software. So while the mainstream world is kind of distracted by AI and that it can write poetry and do all these, fun things, I view it as the real story for us is happening in the physical world. And manufacturing is arguably the greatest frontier on what we now have been picking up as physical AI, where we aren't just moving pixels around, but we're actually moving physical stuff. We're moving steel or other things. And I view it as physical AI as kind of the moment that the brain of the model meets the body of the machine. And according to IoT Analytics in their Q1 2026 report, just last week, boardroom discussions of physical AI have surged by 116% just this quarter. So it represents a shift from the old automation where kind of robots repeated a fixed script to intelligent assets that can perceive their environment. They can reason through problems and they can take physical action to achieve a goal. And it is this intelligence kind of with skin in the game where a mistake has a real world physical consequence. So that's kind of where I focus on is more the physical AI right now.
Perfect. Amazing definition there. I think it's raised again more questions, but it's great to start to frame that around the physical space. Kevin, how are you defining what AI actually means?
Yeah, well, so, I think we're all fans of manufacturing and, despite what we maybe hear in the news, manufacturing is strong. The area that I particularly play in, durable good manufacturing, is a $2.9 trillion industry. And that would put it in like number 8 in the world as far as GDP. So it's a huge landscape, and yet a little bit behind in this. But, what I think the definition of AI in manufacturing is, obviously the ultimate goal may be this automation, either like Ian said, the combination of agents and humans, or ultimately maybe just, these agents. But it's about making these better, faster decisions. And we need this AI to enable systems that sense, analyze, and maybe coordinate these actions across currently now the people and the machines and the software. So, AI's goal is a bit what Jeff mentioned, is to augment the human expertise, especially in these workflows that involve things that, take intelligence, language, decisions, and coordination. So, as we kind of move from this reactive operations to predictive and towards these agentic systems, we want this AI to help us make these closed loop decisions. But as Jeff also points out, it's a physical world out there. So, unfortunately, right now, adoption's a bit naturally slower than, say, what you see in this pure software world where it's, all in the cloud or whatever. When you have to deal with metal and people and buildings and things, and naturally, I think this AI that helps make these decisions is a bit slower to be adopted.
Perfect. So production, physical is important. Augmentation, orchestration is important. Ian, how are we defining this nebulous concept of AI?
Dude, it's hard to top those two answers, but I commend Jeff for taking us through the history of it, because you're right. Ultimately, this idea of its capabilities with Turing to then more of an academic to the way that I spent the last 15 years explaining it really is relating it back to human capabilities. Your eyes, your ears, your hands, your brain, your mouth. Just because a lot of automation is just that. It's just emulating that which we do, whether it would be in a manufacturing environment or in a back office environment. I do have to thank the physical automation world. It has really driven the narrative and the storytelling, right? Back in the sort of the deterministic robotic process automation space, robot was, very much a physical thing in people's minds. And yet it became the name that we used for software automation. The number of times I had to explain to people that this was not mechanical, but it's just because it really does visually tell a story and make it very real for people. I think we've changed the anthropomorphizing from robot to agent, and now we're using that instead. But I do think there are tiers of capability. There are different places it applies within organizations, front, middle, back office, so the virtual stuff, and then factory floor and shipping and logistics and like the more physical space. The hybrid, the coming together of that, especially in areas like Internet of Things, which has been our dream for so long, but it's been very clunky, very heterogeneous, and now it can be much more proactive and much more interlaced. This is a very exciting time to be talking about and driving innovation in manufacturing environments.
Perfect. So we're going to talk about use cases now. As I mentioned at the front, there were a couple of use cases that were put on the screen that this is the survey respondents, remember, it's not the actual use cases that people are experiencing. And so this is an interesting topic, which is a lot of people are asking us, so where do we start or how do we start? But critically, it comes down to the use case. And so where do we believe AI, automation, agentic AI, agents, however we want to cluster together these technologies, physical and operational, but where do we believe these tools and technologies add the most value in manufacturing? And as a side note, what are the challenges, I think, what are they solving for? Kevin, thoughts on use case and kind of why that use case?
Yeah, and I have to go back in history a little bit like Jeff did, but in what I said before was, adoption is slow, and, that perhaps may be the perception. But, and I think that perception is manufacturing's behind, but it may not quite be right. AI or manufacturing didn't miss AI. It just buried it inside of machines. We used it in some form and some definition for decades inside of controls, inside of vision systems, and some, minute process optimization. However, it was invisible to most of the people using it, to the back office, to the C-suite, because it didn't impact workflows. It maybe just impacted this smaller process. So what's changing now is AI is kind of escaping these, machines on the shop floor and moving into quoting and scheduling and decision making, just like, the results of that survey we shared. So we're seeing the real traction in quoting, customer response, customer chatbots, customer support, scheduling, engineering documentation, knowledge management, basically anywhere work is language driven. And that's because AI is, incredibly strong with text and decisions and coordination. So on the shop floor, adoption is happening. There are vision systems for quality control. There is predictive maintenance models to help make sure and, be predictive and prescriptive in keeping your equipment running. But it's a bit slower, and because of these things like Ian mentioned, these integration challenges, this legacy equipment, the fragmented data, all this boring, tedious work that has to be done to get it going. So near term, I think a lot of values in these capturing workflows around production, not so much inside the machines themselves. So the use cases are, where it's administrative, and you want people to be their job titles, not, simply clicking, pointing, and typing into, systems of record and things of that nature.
Right.
Perfect. Ian, thoughts on this?
I'm going to refer back to Jeff. I mean, his comment around and that concept of every once in a while, a little bit of the future breaks off and ends up in the present, and then it stops being sort of futuristic, and it's not AI. I mean, to Kevin's point, manufacturing has been intensely innovative as far as how it incorporates this. And I 25 years ago in my career, I was looking at what used to be called machine to machine, and it was all about trying to make anything, pumps, valves, lighting, ballasts, smart, quote unquote, by giving them embedded sensors and then an ability to communicate how they were doing. We looked at PLCs, we looked at the human machine interfaces, and all of that has always been relatively sophisticated and a great substrate into which AI can start to play a role. And then to Kevin's point, it's that dovetails where the humans were the glue, where they had to do the modeling or the transition of information to some sort of proactive decision. We can now use AI a great deal more to help us find patterns in that data and be predictive in many ways, predictive in maintenance, predictive in inventory, predictive in production, in shipping and logistics. There's lots of cool ways to improve quality and in inspections. We've in some very physical environments in this country, we've got real aging infrastructure, and so we need to be smarter and smarter about how we watch it and maintain it, just because we can't. It's better to be proactive than reactive when transformers and distribution systems go down because they're 80 years old. So I think there's lots of very sophisticated and interesting ways in which, and they all plug into, to make my answer that much longer, they all plug into some of those middle and back office systems finally, to share what they're seeing, to give it the data to allow for predictive operational sort of maintenance and accounting and sales and customer experience, all those areas that have been a little kludgy because there wasn't that dovetail before.
Interesting. Jeff, I appreciate we've got now a couple of really broad use cases and spectrums here, I would say, of areas to focus in on. Thoughts, where are some of these areas that you're hearing, seeing? What are some of the key use cases that are coming to the surface now?
Sure. So from my experience, the biggest value from AI and automation manufacturing today is not coming from kind of the flashy stuff people are talking about at conferences. It's coming from the unsexy but expensive problems that manufacturers fight every day. Now, one thing to note that when we're talking about this is one thing that makes manufacturing a little unique compared to others is because manufacturing is a function and it's an industry. So as a function, it means to manufacture. As an industry, you can include sales, marketing, finance for manufacturers. So in this context, I'm going to be talking about the function of manufacturing because that's the part that makes this particular industry different than other industries. And that's where some of the most expensive problems could be. So anything like bad quality, unstable processes, too much manual inspection, too much time spent finding the root cause of an issue, too much dependence on a few experienced people who just kind of know the plant. And so that's why one of the more interesting data points right now that I reference often is from IoT Analytics and their State of Industrial AI 2025 report that actually says quality inspection is the leading industrial AI use case. And automated optical inspection alone accounts for 11% of industrial AI market. All generative AI use cases combined are still under 5% in the industrial world. And that surprises people because sometimes the public conversation makes it sound like ChatGPT style use cases are the center of AI, and they're not in this world that we're living in. The real money is still in vision systems, process optimization, maintenance, and decision support that's tied to physical operations. And so where I think AI adds the most value, though, is wherever we can kind of compress decision latency on the plant floor. So seeing a problem faster, understanding it faster, and acting on it faster. That could mean AI catching defects that humans miss, or helping operators troubleshoot with context, or predicting equipment failures before it turns into downtime, or surfacing the handful of production variables that are actually driving scrap or cycle loss.
Perfect. So, I mean, the key thing is these use cases are the areas, and the challenges you mentioned there are fantastic, Jeff. The other side of just finding somewhere to deploy it, right? We haven't got our ChatGPT hammer and we're running at all these different use cases. We're doing it for a reason. And that reason is usually an outcome, a benefit, or a value. And so I guess the ultimate question is, how are operations leaders, how are we as leaders thinking about the benefits that these tools should and could drive? What are the KPIs that matter? What are we learning? How do we start to define value from this work? And appreciate it goes back 50, 60 years, but more modern, I'm thinking these newer tools, the newer AI modern tool set, how does value surface up in those? Ian, maybe you can kick us off on this one.
Yeah, I mean, I think Jeff and Kevin are going to have much better answers, but I mean, from a sort of opportunity assessment business case level of thinking, which we do a bunch with clients, we'd always break it down into you've got your cashable and your non-cashable benefits, right? And ultimately cashable benefits are what get projects funded. And unfortunately, too often that comes down to, headcount replacement or replacement of other systems or something very discrete, but somewhat short-sighted, just because I think the impacts and the potential that Jeff and Kevin have both explained are so much bigger now. And so those non-cashable benefits, in the old days, non-cashable meant things like better employee experience, better customer experience, better insight. Now it's intense amounts of broader understanding, better data, better predictive everything, that I think manifests in lots of ways. I mean, we see this in work that we do. We've been able to build agentic sales QA capabilities, for instance, that take a lot of speech to text and look for patterns and figure out compliance, both efficiency and real legislative compliance to things. And that's, step one. But step two is there's just so much better understanding of the discussions that are being had, the people you're having the discussions with, the training, the lack of training, the need for training in some cases. And so all of those ancillary benefits of just a much more holistic view of operations, whether it be plant for manufacturing or out the shipping door and logistics to get to customer, to all of the middle and back office functions within a business. I think the math of AI is far more complex now, which is both promising and exciting, but also a bit of a challenge. You need to really look at this holistically to really put numbers on and justification around the investments necessary to do this right.
Perfect. Jeff, I mean, you've now talked a lot about the physical side. Well, Ian, I know we're talking more management office to physical. Jeff, you're physical back into the management office. How do we see the benefits start to manifest then? Again, looking at both ends, but how are you seeing the benefits and the value manifest?
I mean, I still challenge the thinking right away. When people want to focus on AI strategy or AI benefits, I want to change it to go, this should be your business strategy or operations strategy, and you are evaluating it to see how AI can help that rather than an AI strategy or AI benefits. So we should be asking questions, like did we deploy AI, but did we improve throughput, quality, labor productivity, service levels? And that may sound obvious, but a lot of companies still measure activity instead of impact. So I look at the first mistake companies make is tracking AI with AI metrics first. And that's backwards. You start by measuring what the AI is supposed to improve in the operation. If the use case is quality, then the primary KPIs are like first pass yield or scrap or rework or defect rate or any of that stuff. If it's maintenance, it should look at downtime. It should look at planned versus unplanned maintenance, schedule adherence, that sort of stuff. If the use case is operator support or troubleshooting, then measure troubleshooting time, changeover time, training ramp time. So you can see what you're measuring should be based off of the impact that you're trying to achieve. Now, that being said, there are some unique KPIs that should additionally be tracked to monitor and manage the use and accuracy of AI itself. So after you measure what the AI is doing to your operations, you also need to measure the health and trustworthiness of the AI system. For defect detection model, this might mean precision, recall, false positive rate or false negative rate or model drift over time. And you can see this can change for each thing that you are looking for. So the logic is simple. First, monitor whether AI is improving the process. Then monitor whether the AI itself is performing in a way that is accurate, stable, trusted, and safe enough to keep using. That is how you keep AI from becoming a black box with a smiley face dashboard, but doesn't actually do what you want it to do.
Oh, amazing. Yeah. So trust, credibility, I think, and as you've mentioned here, several times, this is a strategic lever, not just don't look at the tool, don't look at the KPIs of the tool. This is something that affects the business. Start with the business and work your way back into the tool.
Chris, just to be clear, we will be screenshotting the smiley face dashboard look of Jeff Winter later. Okay.
Yeah, no, that's already done. Yeah, for sure.
Good stuff.
Kevin, we're going to talk about time to benefit here, but if you wanted to add on any benefits, value there as well before you answer this next question, which is this all sounds great, right? Everything sounds great. We're going to put big aspirational benefits up on the board. There's a lag. There's a lag in terms of getting stuff built, getting people bought in, getting the stuff set up, actually getting this thing executed. So what would be a realistic time to benefit? And again, we're just talking, conceptually here, but call it meaningful ROI. So I think one is what's the benefit? How do we define meaningful? And then, thinking about that lag time. Kevin, I'll throw all those six. I think I asked 6 questions there, but I think it's what's the benefit and how long does it typically take to realize a benefit that is meaningful enough to want to invest.
Let's see my batting average on this one. Well, so the big, I guess, challenge, or maybe we'll say opportunity, is according to the National Association for Manufacturers, 74% of manufacturing operations are 20 or fewer employees. So you can imagine in a scenario like that many people wear many hats, right? So they have a lot going on. So it's really difficult for them to try to calculate ROI in that traditional investment cashable type way. They're going to struggle. So early on for them, AI only looks like small productivity gains, kind of like what Jeff said: faster quoting time, better scheduling, better turnover, faster training ramping time. But, those things are important because it's like compounding interest, right? It's, this time over time, it compounds and gives you a real competitive advantage, but it's a challenge for smaller 25, 10, 15 person manufacturing operations to wait for that. So it's a challenge for them. But, one thing, when you look at it holistically, they have to kind of think about it in a grander scale. Like we said, Roger Martin wrote a book in 2022. I can't remember the name now, but in it, he has this idea where you have to ask what needs to be true for your decision to work. And, for these smaller manufacturers, if you can make a faster decision, coordinate better, and have these connected workflows to drive performance, then AI is going to matter for you, whether or not you can quantitatively on paper say, I put $1 in and got $4 out today. So, ROI is a tough nut to crack there in that regard. In the same, front, because not all of these manufacturers are the Boeings and the John Deeres with hundreds of thousands of people and massive budgets. Those types of OEMs are solving for complexity across plants and supply chains and product lines and such, where the smaller ones they're just trying to struggle to get capacity. So their teams are lean. So AI can help in all these places that are more administrative. So I think that for them, timeline is critical. It can't be a 5-year horizon that you see this payback. It has to be some things that you can, we alluded to it a little bit in the slides up front. Something you can buy, plug in with a little bit of, some managed service from the provider, get some, quick wins within that 12 months. I think that's pretty critical for the smaller ones. And as you grow larger in scope, I think the timeline can stretch out, and you can maybe larger companies can place some bets that may not work out, where the smaller ones can't necessarily do that. So I think maybe I got like 4.5 out of 6 questions there.
No, you nailed it. You hit all 6. I think you even threw in a couple extras there of your own accord. So thank you. Jeff, thoughts on ROI, lag, and or realistic? I love that answer, by the way, Kevin. That was great, right? Now, just to summarize, pick a couple of small bits, get those quick wins within a year, and then find some bigger projects once you're starting to prove success. Fantastic. Jeff, how would you build on that? How would you challenge that even?
It's a harder one, because what I would tell leaders is this: the clock starts when the workflow changes, not when the model turns on. And this is the part that people underestimate, because organizations are investing aggressively in AI, but ROI is often hard to isolate because AI is entangled with the broader transformations, and organizational change still moves slower than the technology. I mean, Deloitte, in one of their recent studies, even says that leaders are using generative AI, or they're attempting to, for quicker wins, and agentic AI is being used for more deeper operational change. So I guess I would say, like, my practical answer would be this: quick wins, maybe in 1 quarter if it's small, isolated, and something that you can immediately apply on, but credible operational ROI inside a year to 18 months. And that's not even including like real transformational stuff, which you should plan on 2 to 3 years. If, an agent is tied to high value workflow change that's, completely taking your company in a different direction. So it's not a simple answer, because it depends on what you're using it for. And something as simple as, like I said, buying a $20 a month ChatGPT license, or completely redoing a workflow.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, this does segue into our next question here, which, Ian, feel free to add on to that. I think you've got about 12 questions to answer there, and then we can add another 12 on this next one. But it's readiness. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll hijack the question stream for a moment, because I don't want to throw a question to Kevin and Jeff, which is ultimately from a timing and criticality standpoint. I mean, Kevin, you mentioned a lot of manufacturers are smaller operations. They don't have the Boeing tens of thousands. Isn't it also true that we're facing sort of a demographic cliff here, where a large number of experts who are the domain experts on the ground, who really know this stuff in their gut, they know it because they've been doing it for decades, and they're about to all retire. And so we need to figure out, I mean, there's a sort of a burning platform element here too, of we're about to lose a tremendous amount of skill and insight and expertise that will just walk out the door because we're not having as many new people walk through the door to learn, to apprentice, and to replace them. Is that a fair statement?
Sure. I'll go first and say, yeah, that's where one of the, I would say, more aspirational stories behind AI in manufacturing is bigger than productivity. AI is starting to become a way to capture and scale industrial judgment. And that matters because manufacturers always had a hidden fragility. I mean, too much performance depends on tribal knowledge locked in the heads of a few people that are most likely going to retire soon.
Right.
AI can help turn that from person dependent to system supported. But the catch is it only works when the data architecture is strong enough to feed it. I mean, IoT Analytics, another one of the reports, said that most leading manufacturers now have formal CEO-driven AI strategies, but they're also being forced to modernize fragmented MES, SCADA, historian, and data environments because the AI can't sit on top of that kind of mess. I mean, you look at it, you know, there are hundreds of billions of dollars being spent on AI, and 54% of manufacturers are still running their production on paper, pen, or spreadsheets. That's a mismatch on where they're kind of putting their priorities. And MLC, Manufacturing Leadership Council, found that 65% of manufacturers say they don't have the right data for AI, 82% lack the skills to leverage it, and 71% said they need better proof. Meanwhile, Deloitte and the Manufacturing Institute said that manufacturing could need as many as 3.8 million new workers by 2030 or 2033, with 1.9 million roles potentially going unfilled. So there is both a short-term and a long-term play for AI, and the bigger long-term play is capturing all that knowledge and working it into the systems.
Brilliant. Chris, where do you want me to go now?
No, that's it. You got the mic now. Off you go.
Exactly. Questions.
It's actually, so it also segues into the next question, which is readiness, right? So, I mean, I won't take away any thunder here, but there is a stack of stuff that organizations have to be thinking about today in order to get ready, not just for AI, but everything we've talked about here in terms of the new skills shift, talent coming in, talent going out. I mean, Jeff, you've provided a bunch there, but we'll come back around. Ian, I mean, how should leaders be thinking about readiness in their organization?
No, I think that's brilliant. And Jeff touched on some of those. I mean, we break it down. I mean, ultimately, the way I put it is everybody wants to be AI first, and yet first you need to be AI ready. And so many just are not. And Jeff just pointed that out very well with data, which is ultimately, and the way that we think about it is there's 5 sort of pillars of AI readiness. And so data is very much one of them. Do you have it? Do you know where it is? Is it structured in any way, shape, or form? I mean, the hope that AI can auto-magically just be dumped on a lake and make sense of it is a pipe dream, and frankly, also a hallucination nightmare. So you need to have AI data readiness. Process is another one, ultimately, and I mean, I think Jeff said too, I mean, so much of the ground truth, so much of the understanding of what goes on in any operation, front, middle, or back, or wherever, it really is here and is in the gut. Camera's not low enough to see my gut. There's a lot of it down there. But so that needs to be captured. And also not just captured as sort of law that what I said is the way we do it, but as a starting point, because processes need to be re-engineered now that we're employing various different capabilities to get the work done. So you got data, you got process, you've got just tech and infrastructure. So also mentioned, you've got all these disparate systems, all sorts of legacy stuff, some of it homegrown, some of it just well past support. You've got talent. And so that's going to come from upskilling and training in AI literacy, but also from new entrant and kids coming in to start their apprenticeships and start their jobs. And then ultimately governance, right? Because you've got to have some control over this so it doesn't just run rampant, especially in the era of easier, what we used to call citizen development. Now we call vibe coding or agentic engineering or whatever new name there is for it today. But you have to have control over that. And so most organizations, I would bet a good deal of money would score very low on each of those pillars and score very low collectively across those pillars. Maybe there are parts of their business that score higher than others, but since this really is that connective tissue between functions and departments and divisions, you really do need everyone to up their game so that you are in fact ready to even have the discussion, to even entertain that CEO top-down mandate of we're going AI everything, and everybody in the operations like that's cute, also really frustrating. And what do we do first? And that's where most people are stuck right now.
Perfect. Kevin, thoughts on readiness? Where are folk, and where are the areas we need to think about readiness?
Well, kind of in Silicon Valley, failure is expected and it's cheap. Move fast, break things, iterate, all that kind of stuff. But in manufacturing, failure is expensive. Margins are thin. Your capital's tied up in equipment, and there's downtime that have real consequences. But it's easy to say, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. You do have to start. And I 100% agree with Ian that you need to have these, foundational strategies in place for your overarching AI strategy. But I think that if you wait for all of the 5 pillars that Ian has described to be 100% baked before you start the other one, I think you may be a bit behind. You have to have a plan and work the plan, but kind of thinking of all levels of that plan as you go, right? And you got to maybe start small, but not wait, right? The companies that are getting ahead right now aren't the ones maybe necessarily with the best strategy or fully baked strategy yet, but they're the ones that started learning earlier. Your best competitive advantage is, learning in my regard. So if you can build a system and those strategies in place, and then also build a little room for your teams to experiment, because, not every use case has been worked out. Everyone has a little bit of uniqueness inside of their company. Let your teams experiment a little bit while they work on these, small wins, I think is a critical way to get going.
Can I build on that and ask a question of Kevin, Chris? Thanks.
Yes.
So, some of the experimentation takes the shape of adopting things like Copilot these days. And Copilot writes an email for you faster or summarizes meeting notes. And that's, incremental, interesting. And maybe the byproduct is cognitive offloading, where people stop thinking and they just think that this stuff has done it for them. I would imagine it's quite a bit harder to do iterative, like light experiments in a manufacturing environment. Or what sort of experimentation have you seen, or do you think folks should be embracing now?
Well, I think one experiment I remember, when I ran at a previous company, we had a few service engineers, the experienced ones that, were, well experienced, about done. And, they would start to record all the things they did as they worked on their equipment, right? And not because they wanted to write it in the notes, they wanted to write it in their notes later, but then, they thought, well, we can compress that text and kind of steal some of that for, building that tribal knowledge base, right? So I think these were just a few guys that tried it on their own. They experimented, right? So they thought, if I use voice to text, then I can, have some AI in the background, condense this, and pass on to the future. So I think it takes a few entrepreneurial type people to just think about what's their pain point in their daily work life or workflow. As long as you encourage that entrepreneurial spirit, I think some of these experiments will kind of manifest themselves. But you got to give them a little bit of latitude, I think.
Interesting. In no way, shape, or form a pitch for a book I wrote a few years ago, but when looking at citizen development, is what we called it at the time, it looked like engineering-heavy companies were the ones who embraced this more capably, just because I think those folks that you just mentioned, as part of their education, and then certainly as part of their job, they approach things methodically with an engineering mindset, which makes them really good early adopters of this, more so than, and not to throw shade on any particular department, but maybe more so than some folks in an HR shared service center, or maybe even finance. It's the engineers and the operators in the organization that do have a lot of domain expertise and a thoughtful approach to how to experiment with the tools available to them today.
And one thing I'll add is, I would say start where 3 things overlap. First, the pain is real. Second, the data is available enough. And third is the decision cycle is frequent enough that improvement compounds. So in manufacturing, it's usually going to mean things like quality inspection, operator troubleshooting support, maintenance triage, scheduling support, or process parameter optimization. These are good starting points because they tend to have visible loss, they have repeated decisions, and a clear path to KPI movement. I would not start with the most futuristic use case. I would start with the one where operators will say, yes, if you fix that, I will feel it this week. Now, what framework should you use to look at that? Well, I would separate this maybe into two buckets. For manufacturing transformation readiness or Industry 4.0, I like to recommend SIRI, the Smart Industry Readiness Index. It cuts across process, technology, and organization in 16 categories. And you can't really get to the highest level of those categories without using AI. So it's more about the outcome, not AI. But for AI specific readiness and governance, I would say look at NIST's AI's RMF. If you want something more manufacturing specific, you can look at Amiri. Amiri was launched by Insight, the same group that did Siri, but it's specifically focused on AI readiness. So it includes things like strategy, governance, data foundation, use cases across operations, supply chain, product lifecycle. So you got a couple different ways to look at it. One is whether you're looking at the outcome Industry 4.0 or you're looking at AI specific. So that's kind of my recommendation for kind of where to start and how to approach readiness.
Nice.
Well, you got the microphone there, Jeff. I mean, readiness is a big topic, and Ian's, we talked about his 5-pillar frameworks. Kevin's talked about the entrepreneurial spirit, right? And you've talked about how how we should be bringing these worlds together and building on. If you were to think of harder and say you approach a leader in operations, manufacturing operations, and they say, what's the one thing we should focus on, right? How would you start to help them get to that answer? Appreciate you may not give them the answer, but it's how do you help them answer that question? Is it just that decision logic that you mentioned, or is there a different way to get to that answer?
I mean, I usually start by understanding what is it you're trying to achieve as an organization, and are you knowledgeable enough, or the team knowledgeable enough to understand how AI can help support that business decision? What I find is that oftentimes they're familiar with pockets or pieces of AI. So as they're developing their strategy revision to include AI, they've limited their vision because they weren't fully aware of what the technology could do. And so you need to have some basic level of technical understanding of what is possible in order to know how to revise your vision and strategy to get there. So I'm usually starting with my first questions of how do you define AI and how familiar are you with what AI can do and how it works?
Perfect. Ian.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a great one, just because, again, as the first question highlighted, it's so hard to do that, right? Even AI experts struggle with defining AI. So it's what's a framework that's useful to you and your operations, how you do things. And Jeff also spoke to, and this is 15 years of experience talking, but every time we would go in and work with an enterprise of any size in any function in any industry, and you sat down they would always pair you up with process owners, trainers, or subject matter experts, or, that was one and the same, whoever. And they would tell you what it is that they do today. There was always a delta. There was always a gap between what they said and ultimately what was then done, like the ground truth, right? Or, if you had a team of more than one, you had more than one ways that things were being done. And so that often gets in the way of then the next sensible discussion of, okay, so what are we trying to achieve? What does good look like? And how do we need to pivot from where we are today and prepare to then, in this case, agentify, or back then it was to digitize, which we've stopped using for some reason. I don't know why we don't use digital anymore. It's still all digital. And so, I mean, frankly, this is why our belief is that you have to live the work initially, because you have to, and whether it's done internally or whether it's done through a third party, it's to really gain a level of understanding and intimacy with the work and all of the exceptions and unhappy paths and systems. And, just because every single time we've ever gone to build something against a solution design document drafted through discussions with the subject matter expert, there's always a gap. And so you need to land that ground truth, and then you need to understand the tools in your tool set, as Jeff said, like what AI do we have in here? I mean, some of it's just simple speech to text. A lot of our processes start with a call, or it's better intelligent document processing because this process always starts with a document. It's just understanding which pieces and parts of AI are necessary to pull out of that toolkit and put in the order that you need to then create a better, more high functioning, valuable process. And I guess to make my answer even longer, and then it's also to have the freedom and the flexibility, because this isn't like classical, this is jazz. You got to be able to riff, the freedom to question everything and to redesign why the process is the way it is in the first place. More often than not, it's there because it had to be that way because of something historical that you aren't constrained by anymore. And so you can be more creative about how you redesign getting that outcome and getting that success that you're going for.
Perfect. Jeff, Kevin, we've got a question coming up about build versus buy, but anything to add on this readiness section before we transition over to the build versus buy question?
No, I think that it's a unique time where I think that, some people call AI a tool, but I think it's more than a tool. I think it's finally a forcing function to drive that transformation that, that Jeff was talking about that we have to do and along the way with this. So don't treat it as a tool, treat it as a shift in how work gets done and help you focus on redesigning the workflows and transformation, not just adding another piece of technology to your toolbox, I think.
Perfect. We've got about 6 minutes left here, and we've got a bunch of questions. I've got 2 more questions for the audience, and then we'll see how many of these we can get through. Just as a heads up for the presenters, there's a lot of questions here about governance and security, specifically around data. So just to keep that in the back of your mind as we get through these next 2 questions. But build and buy, right? We saw at the data at the front, a lot of organizations have started exploring AI. A lot of manufacturing organizations have started exploring AI. Majority are doing it with a partner, but there were a smattering of folk at the bottom end of that doing it themselves, or a hybrid of picking some areas to do with a partner, some to do with themselves. It's a big question. It's a question that always comes up in every technology movement, and every piece of tool has the question build or buy or partner. Jeff, how do you answer that question? How do you feel about the build versus buy discussion here?
So I feel like part of this is applicable to any technological decision, and part of it is a little bit more unique to AI. But generally, I would say you need to decide kind of on a couple key criteria. For buy is you choose that when the capability is more horizontal and already mature. This could be cloud AI services, co-pilots, model hosting, ML ops tooling, data platforms, vision libraries. Anything that kind of off-the-shelf use cases are not your company's competitive advantage. You want to partner when the value depends on industrial context, integration, and change management. So connecting like AI to MES or historians or SCADA or CMMS, quality systems. This is especially true in manufacturing because the challenge is rarely the model by itself. It's embedding it into the real operations. And then you build kind of usually only where the logic, the workflow, or the knowledge is uniquely yours and could become a strategic advantage. This might be a proprietary troubleshooting agent built around your process history, or scheduling a parameter optimization tune to your constraints, or an internal knowledge agent that captures decades of tribal knowledge and know-how in a way that competitors, can't copy. So in other words, build when the advantage is in the workflow and the know-how, not when you're just rebuilding someone else's foundation. And for agentic AI specifically, that same logic kind of gets stronger. Buy the agent framework, partner on the integration governance, build the domain brain.
Okay, strong answer. Kevin, how are you feeling about build versus buy versus partner?
Well, I think Jeff really kind of hit it out of the park there. But, as you mentioned, a lot of the three quarters of the manufacturers are small. So I think it may be a progression. It may have to just start buying, right? Because that's all you can do. And the good thing, like what Jeff said, is when you have those great horizontal use cases, those providers see what good looks like. So they can help you, get to the point where you are good. Your process may not be the best, but the provider knows what good looks like. And as you grow and get some wins, maybe you can start to partner and do some of the things of connecting the MESs, as Jeff mentioned. So I think for a majority of the manufacturers, it's a kind of a progression. And then once you're hitting on all cylinders and have this great strategy, maybe you can start to dabble and experiment with bringing on a data scientist or a data engineer into your team and do those things. So I think it's not a either or. It could be a progression depending on your size and your goals.
Perfect. Ian, thoughts on build, buy, partner?
I mean, I'll echo Kevin and just like Jeff dropped the mic there. And so that was awesome. And Kevin, great add on into it. I mean, ultimately, and again, this goes back to my experiences over the last 20 years, and especially because, a lot of people wanted to develop their own capabilities. And oftentimes that meant that they needed to be a bit of a software engineering organization. And if you aren't a software firm, don't think that you can all of a sudden be one, and don't pretend to be one. And so there's a lot to be said for partnering in general. And that's, buying, I suppose, in this framework, just partnering and borrowing understanding and expertise and capabilities. Your moat is not your ability to vibe code something else up. Your moat is that historical knowledge that you have of how you do what you do, who you serve, how you serve them, and how you compete in the industry. And so stand on that and look to others to help you to supercharge that in the form of, and again, that spectrum of AI is quite big now, but in the form of internal, deterministic workflow automations across the organization, to then developing your own large language models, or developing vibe coding up apps that do some of what you need. I wouldn't put too much stock in the sort of the SaaS apocalypse concept of we don't need to use third-party tools anymore. That feels like something that a lot of people will regret badly in 2 years when they realize they're not software companies and they don't know how to maintain this stuff, and now everything's off the rails. So this is moving so fast. And to Jeff's point, you need to stay on top of what's out there. And I don't know, frankly, I don't know how anyone's staying on top of what's out there these days, because there's a new model landing. I mean, I wouldn't doubt that in this discussion, 3 new models have landed that have completely changed the world. And as soon as I get back on TikTok, I'll have a massive fear of missing out, rage up in me. And so you need to collaborate and partner with peers, with service providers, as well as to tap into all the great experience and intelligence and domain expertise in your own organizations.
Perfect. We're into the last question here, which is, and I'll if we're quick, we can answer the security question. But last question, really, on the predefined questions is, what is one piece of advice you would give to any operations leader in manufacturing who is looking to explore AI in any of its forms today? Kevin.
I think we've done a pretty good job of covering it, but you can't wait. The ones who start to adopt and try are going to be separate from ones that don't, right? So make a plan, get your data strategy and your, all the other strategies that Ian mentioned in place, going, and start now. You can't wait any longer.
Okay, go now.
Simple,
don't wait.
I think.
That's perfect. Jeff?
Do not think that agentic AI is some magical new thing. Think of it as a tool that can help people make better decisions faster inside real operational work. Start in a place where the problem is already obvious, where people would generally benefit. Be clear about what the system is allowed to do on its own, where people are still needed, and how you're going to judge whether it's helping or not. And most importantly, do not expect it to fix broken ways of working. If the process is messy, the data is unreliable, or nobody is really sure who owns the decision, the technology is not going to clean that up for you. It'll just make those problems just visible and worse. The companies getting the most value out of this will be the ones that stay grounded, pick the right problems, and build trust step by step.
Perfect. Trust. Problem hunting the right way. Love it. Kevin's abandoned us early, but that's okay. We'll get on to the last bit, which is Ian. Final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo them both, Kevin and Jeff. In so much as you really kind of, unfortunately, the sense is you really can't wait anymore. I mean, and I was always much more sort of staid and measured and pragmatic and calm about this stuff. Now it's the time has passed. This is changing too fast, and it's having the level of impact is too significant to ignore. But that experimentation does two things for you. One, it just gives you, it exposes you to the vocabulary, right? Because just the words, the nomenclature is confusing and changing frequently. So you need to just understand the words. What do we mean by, and we didn't cover this in detail here, but what do we mean by agentic AI and AI agents and you need to be comfortable in that discussion. And then you really, and Jeff said this well, you treat this as a lens through which to look at your operation, to question how you do everything. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to use these tools to change everything, but it's a great catalyst for change. And really everybody throughout an organization right now knows that change is imperative. And so this is a great sort of kick in the pants and a great justification to take a look at how everything is done and challenge convention. Ask if you could do it differently and better.
Perfect. Get started. Pick the right use case. Challenge convention. Could something be done better? We're out of time. I know I threatened to ask the final question, but we have hit the time here. As I said, we got a bunch of questions in the thread here. A lot more than we can answer in one session here. So,
by the way, that's very Pandora's box, where like hope was the thing that was left in the box when they closed it. Like you left security and compliance in the box, and boom, and so.
So it was wrapped in a governance bubble as well. There's layers on this question. And so it felt like we probably got 30 minutes to answer that. What I'm going to suggest is we take this one offline. We'll share it back with everyone who's on the thread here. There's a few other questions there that we'll come back with some answers on. We've just run out of time. And this has been fantastic. I'd like to thank the fantastic panel that's been with us all the way through here today. Thank you very much for your time. And thanks to all the audience for attending. The session's been recorded. We will send this out afterwards. We'll be sharing clips and, as I said, the questions that we couldn't get through today. But again, thank you everyone for joining us. And yeah, we look forward to seeing you in the next one.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers all.